Alright guys, so here's a tip today on how to shape your basses and how to shape your low end. So, it's just a little tip today, but basically, what you have to always remember when you're designing basses, like if you're making really powerful basses that, fill out the sub bass area and the low mids, take this sound for example. If you look on Span, right? I've created the sound using a sine wave and a square wave and a low pass filter. Bit of distortion on it and some movement from the filter and the detuning as well between the oscillators, But if you look at the frequency spectrum, you see how it's very full, it's very filled out, like especially all of this sort of area here. There is a nice little gap here. So in that case, it already has like a bit of a shape there, But because we're filling out so much content in the mid-range, this is where you need to pay attention to how you're going to shape the bass, because the idea of shaping it is to make it so it doesn't completely overwhelm the whole spectrum, So basically, one way you can simply do that is to either use an EQ and take some frequencies out somewhere, or what I like to do is just use a notch filter within the synth itself when I'm designing it, and you can instantly hear like how much of a difference it'll make. So when you're playing it with a beat as well, even without any side chaining or any mix down work done, if I add in a notch filter here like this, you hear how the mix down like instantly becomes better and everything instantly becomes clearer. And the reason for that is just that we've shaped the bass a bit more, so it's not overwhelming like every single frequency in the low end and the mid range. So listen again with it off and then on. And it's funny because we've taken frequencies out of the bass, but the whole mix down seems more loud and powerful now because we've done that. So the concept that I'm trying to basically instill in you guys from this video is that if you have a really fat, powerful bass with loads of content in, that is going to use up all of your headroom, So even if you shape it with a filter like this, you can see now we're making the cut on this filter at 234 hertz. So that's sort of this area here. If I take the filter off, and you can have a look again on Span, you can see if you can notice the difference. It's difficult to actually see the difference on Span. But it's very obvious how much of a difference it makes when you listen, So, the Span will show you that there's so many frequencies, being filled out by the sound. And so even when you notch filter some of the frequencies out, even in a subtle like way, you still keep the whole bass like intact, like it still sounds just as good. But you put that notch filter on, and instantly it gives you more headroom in your mix. So off again and on. So it's like a small, subtle notch filter that makes the world of difference, basically. And that's why I use them so much in my sound design process. And you want to be careful about where you notch as well. So if you were to notch a bit lower, there sort of around 92 hertz, that's almost like a negative effect, because then you're sort of sacrificing the bass power of the sound, you know, and essentially it's supposed to be a bass sound, so you kind of want the bass part, the low part of the bass, to still be really powerful. So when you're like notching out space in a sound, you want to pick somewhere higher up. So it could be sort of anywhere between, you know, 200 and 500, something like that. For this sound, it works quite nicely at around 250. You know, before I had 234. But yeah, on a second listen, it could just as easily work around like 270 even, so a little bit higher than my first sort of estimation, you know. Yeah, 250 is pretty good. And the reason why the notch works here is because that it's because of the particular drums that I've got going on, you know. The notch works there because it's carving out a bit more space in the mix down for the drums as well. And obviously, you know, you can talk about you know, doing side chaining to get separation and all that kind of stuff. You know, I'm not talking about side chaining on this video, but what I am saying is that basically, if you have a really powerful bass line where you're using things like sine waves and square waves, and you're sort of creating this kind of bass where the whole sort of frequency spectrum is pretty much like it's kind of really full on, like through all of the low mids and the mids, you know. Then when you've got that kind of sound, a simple little notch filter, even if you don't necessarily register exactly where it's coming in on span, because it's quite a subtle one, you have to feel it with your ears. But doing that somewhere in that sort of low mid range where there's like loads of content going on, you're going to clear out like a nice pocket of space for the whole rest of the mix, you know. And it's like, you could say you're removing the mud from the bass, but I don't really like that analogy, because like if the bass was on its own and you didn't have the filter, like I wouldn't say that it like necessarily sounds super muddy, you know. Like it kind of sounds fine. The point is that when you notch something out, you give it more of a shape, then you've essentially made the bass have like a bit some little gaps in the spectrum, so it doesn't overwhelm everything else, you know. So it's more of a like a mixing hack where the whole bass still seems powerful and it still has like, you know, all of that goodness is still in there, but like by notching out a little pocket, you've freed up like a load of extra room in the rest of your mix down at basically no extra cost, you know. So that's what I talk about when I talk about shaping your bass, because I always mention this, and sometimes people ask me like, what do you actually mean by that? So shaping your bass is basically you're creating a bass from scratch using additive synthesis like Vital or Serum or Phase Plant or whatever, and you've got loads of like, you've added in loads of frequencies, and it's really filling out the whole low end and the mid range, which is great. But then by shaping it, by sort of shaving some little parts off, giving it a little trim just in the right area, you allow the bass to have more of a unique shape, and then it will clear up loads of other headroom in your mix down, and it'll fit like into your mix more pleasantly. You know, it'll fit in the mix down more pleasantly because it has been refined a little bit. It's not just a full on, you know, lump of frequencies. Even if you want it super, you know, dominating and powerful, there's usually always a little space for a notch filter somewhere, to give it even just a little 5 or 10% more shaping, and then the whole mix down will be able to breathe a bit more around it, you know. So that's why you'll see me doing notch filters all the time, and that's really the sort of mindset behind it. It's to give a little bit more space within the sort of the whole shape of the bass, you know, carve a little bit out so that it feels like more, it's not just a big lump, it's like it's had a little bit of work done to it, so that then, you know, it gives you that bit of extra breathing room in the rest of your mix, you know. So it's a super simple little concept, but that's sort of the reasoning behind it all, you know. So it's just it's like one basic sound design tip that I'm just hammering in on this video. But I wanted to sort of give you like the whole backstory behind it of like why it's good to do that. So it's, as just to repeat, it's not like, you don't want to think of it as like you need to remove the mud from the sound. It's more just the fact that by giving a sound like a specific shape, you know, in your, particularly a bass, by giving it this particular shape, so it's not just a big like overwhelming lump, you know, you allow yourself to have more breathing room in the whole mix, you know. So it's really simple when you kind of explain it like that, I think. So that's why you can do that. And you know, if you go, as I mentioned, if you go too low, you'll start to take out some power, but it's usually in that area, I would say sort of between 200 and 500, you can usually find a nice sweet spot to carve a little bit out, and it should help the whole mix down have a bit more separation, you know. But test it on every sound, and like use your ears. You might have designed the sound where it's not overwhelming the frequency spectrum to begin with, and in which case you might not need to do that. But often the times when you're doing additive synthesis and you're combining like low end oscillators together, then often it will help, you know, like 9 times out of 10. So test it out and think of it as how you're sculpting the frequencies of the bass to give it like a, you know, definition and shape so that it works well in the mix down. So it's a good like sort of bass sound design tip for you guys. One more thing as well, when you're doing stuff like this, like just low pass basses and stuff like that, the sound's always going to sound more full and complete if there's some high end on it, even if it's just a touch, like a tiny bit of white noise. You might not even, you can kind of see the white noise poking up here on span, you know. But without it, sort of it ends like around 4K or something, you know. But if we put that noise back on, you know, just having that like concept of the bass filling out, you know, having at least some content in every part of the frequency spectrum, even the high end, you know, it makes the bass feel like more complete and finished and full, and it'll help it cut through your mix down as well. So like, that's why I always put a bit of white noise on, a bit of high end on everything, even those super low pass basses that you'd think they might not have anything up in the top, you know, frequency spectrum area. You're wrong. Like if you're listening to my tracks, they all do, you know, because every sound has this feeling of completion and fullness. And it's difficult to get that feeling of completion and fullness often in a sound unless it covers the whole frequency range. So even those sort of low pass basses will tend to sneak in a bit of white noise on them, you know, so that's a little bonus tip. But yeah, just try out the notch filters next time you're doing your sound design, and think of it as you're basically, you've got a wonderful like floret of broccoli. Is it a floret? You know, and you're just like, you know, the stalk is like always too fat on the broccoli. The tree part on the top looks lovely, but the stalk's always really fat. And a notch filter is just like you're sort of cutting a bit of a nicer shape into the stalk. So that fat, weighty low end becomes more defined. And then the whole mix down gets to have more freedom to be more dynamic again, you know? So hopefully that helps you guys out today. Just a little mini tip. Peace and blessings. Wish you a wonderful rest of your day. Much love. Please like and comment. That really helps me out. And leave a Yeah. Check out the links down below as well, for my preset packs for Serum, Vital, Faceplant, and Current. I've got mentorship services, one-on-one lessons available, mixing and mastering work. If you send me an email, I can give you a price for that. And also, there's some other affiliate links down below for like my recommended sample packs, recommended plugins, and finally, come and join me on Patreon and join my Discord community, because we have some great members in there, and we do lots of group things like feedback live streams and stuff like that coming up very soon. All right, that's it for me today. More from me soon. Much love.